In the shadow of towering mesas, Sarah Bedford's small cabin stood as a beacon of solace in the unforgiving frontier. Though darkness had claimed her sight years before, her ears caught every whimper, every cry of distress that drifted through the settlement. Each evening, as the sun surrendered to twilight, Sarah would sit on her porch, her weathered hands folded in her lap, and sing. Her voice, clear as mountain water, carried lullabies across the dusty streets, soothing every colicky, infant and weary mother within earshot. For 15 years, she had been the settlement's nightingale, asking nothing in return for her nightly vigil of song. What would happen when the mighty Apache chief Ałchíní, known for his wisdom but fierce protection of tribal boundaries, discovers this blind settler woman with a voice that could calm even the most troubled spirits? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's fingers traced the frayed edges of her shawl as the first evening breeze whispered through the cottonwoods. She had knitted this shawl herself 15 years ago, when her eyes still captured the brilliance of desert sunsets. The intricate border stitching, a pattern her mother had taught her, remained her last visual memory before fever took her. Sight but spared her life. Another beautiful evening, isn't it, Thomas? She called out, turning her face toward the familiar footsteps, approaching her porch. Dr. Thomas Wells paused, momentarily startled. No matter how quietly he tried to approach, Sarah always knew. Your ears put an owl to shame, Miss Bedford, he chuckled, climbing the 3 wooden steps to her porch. The 4th one he deliberately skipped. It creaked something terrible. When one sense dims, others sharpen to compensate, she replied, a gentle smile warming her face. At 42, Sarah's features had been weathered by frontier life, yet retained a serene beauty that made the good doctor's heart quicken. Any new arrivals I should know about? Thomas settled into the chair beside hers, his leg stiff from a Gettysburg bullet that had ended his military service. Martha Watson's twins are still colicky. Poor woman hasn't slept properly in weeks. Sarah nodded, her unseeing eyes directed toward the horizon. I heard them last night. Tell Martha I'll sing the willow song tonight. It always helps with stomach troubles. Before the war, Thomas had been skeptical of such notions, that specific melodies could treat specific ailments. Now, after watching Sarah's voice soothe countless suffering infants when his medical treatments failed, he'd begun documenting her songs in his journal, matching melodies to symptoms with scientific precision. You were a school teacher before, weren't you? He asked, though he knew the answer. In the 3 years since he'd arrived at Cottonwood Settlement, he'd collected every scrap of Sarah's history like precious specimens. In St. Louis, she confirmed. Taught children their letters and numbers for nearly 10 years before James and I came west. Her fingers found the small pocket watch she kept in her apron, her late husband's timepiece, stopped at the moment raiders had taken his life 12 years ago. The same raid that had scattered the young settlement's population, leaving behind only the most stubborn or desperate souls. Thomas watched her fingers move across the watch face. He wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her what he'd kept silent these 3 years. But courage failed him, as it often did when it mattered most. A woman's voice called from the dusty road, interrupting his thoughts. Miss Sarah! Miss Sarah! That's Martha, Sarah said, rising smoothly to her feet. She's brought the twins. Thomas marveled at how confidently Sarah navigated her porch, turning to face the approaching woman without hesitation. Martha Watson trudged up the path, dark circles beneath her eyes, a fussing infant balanced on each hip. Miss Sarah, I'm at my wit's end, Martha pleaded, voice cracking with exhaustion. They won't settle for nothing, and I've got washing piling. Up higher than the Rockies, Sarah extended her arms. Give me little Emma. You keep hold of Jacob. With practiced ease, she cradled the wailing infant, her body swaying gently as she began to hum a melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The effect was remarkable. Within moments, Emma's cries softened to whimpers, then ceased altogether. Jacob, still in his mother's arms, turned his head toward Sarah's voice, his own cries diminishing as the lullaby washed over him. Martha's eyes filled with tears of relief. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Miss Sarah. Since Robert passed in that mining accident, you've been our saving grace." Thomas observed the scene with professional interest, noting how the infant's breathing synchronized with Sarah's melody, how their tiny fists unclenched. In his medical journal, he documented dozens of such cases: children with croup, colic, fever, and fear, all calmed by specific songs from Sarah's repertoire. As the melody ended, Sarah carefully returned Emma to Martha. "Steep some fennel seeds in hot water. Let it cool, then give them each a spoonful before bed. Between that and tonight's singing, they should sleep better. Bless you," Martha whispered, adjusting both now peaceful infants in her arms. After Martha departed, Sarah turned her face toward the mountains rising beyond the settlement. "There's movement in the hills, Thomas. I've been hearing it for 3 nights now." Thomas straightened. "Apache? Perhaps. The footsteps are lighter than cavalry boots, more careful." She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "And someone's been watching, listening to me sing." "I should inform Lieutenant Harker," Thomas said, rising to his feet. Sarah laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Not yet. Whoever it is hasn't approached with ill intent. I sense ... curiosity." "Curiosity can turn dangerous quick out here," Thomas cautioned. Sarah's unseeing eyes seemed to look through him, to some truth beyond. "Fear makes enemies faster than actions do. My voice carries beyond our settlement borders, Thomas. I've always known that. Perhaps it's time it built bridges instead of walls." As Thomas reluctantly departed, Sarah tilted her head, listening to something only she could hear, the whisper of moccasined feet retreating into the gathering dusk, back toward the mountains where the Apache made their home, high in the sheltered canyon where juniper and pinon pine softened the harsh desert landscape. Chief Ałchíní stood at the entrance of his daughter's lodge, the wooden flute in his hand carved from river willow and adorned with symbols of healing felt useless now. For weeks he had played the sacred melodies passed down through generations of Apache healers. Yet his beloved Nasha still woke, screaming from night terrors that left her trembling until dawn. "The spirits test her strength," said Ałchíní, the tribe's elderly medicine man, his face a map of deep crevices carved by 8 decades of sun and wisdom. "And yours, my chief." Ałchíní's jaw tightened beneath his stoic expression. At 46, he had led the people of the White Mountain Apache with a measured hand that balanced tradition with pragmatic diplomacy. His name, meaning "he of the generous heart," had been earned through years of fair dealings with neighboring tribes, and, when necessary, with the white settlers who pushed ever closer to their ancestral lands. 6 moons now, Ałchíní replied, his deep voice barely above a whisper. 6 moons since she first woke with the night screams. Your medicines have not helped. The songs of our ancestors fall on deaf ears. Inside the lodge, his wife Keola gently sponged their daughter's forehead with cool water. At 10 years old, Nasha had once been the most joyful child in the tribe, quick to laugh, clever with her hands, beloved by all. Now she lay thin and pale, exhaustion etched across her young face. The council awaits your wisdom, Ałchíní reminded him, gesturing toward the large central fire where 7 tribal elders had gathered. Among them stood Nightingale, a young warrior whose ambition often manifested as zealous traditionalism. Ałchíní nodded, reluctantly leaving his daughter's side. As he approached the council circle, he noted how Niall had positioned himself at the northern point, the place of challenge. The young warrior's father had been Ałchíní's closest friend. killed by cavalry soldiers in a misunderstanding 5 seasons past. The son had never forgiven what he viewed as Ałchíní's insufficient vengeance. Our scouts report more settlers. Arriving in the valley, Niall announced without waiting for the chief's formal opening of council. They build permanent structures of wood and stone. They divert the small creek for their livestock. Murmurs rippled through the gathered elders. Ałchíní took his place in the circle, accepting the ceremonial pipe from Elder C, who had served as advisor to Ałchíní's father before him. The valley has sustained both our people and theirs for 7 seasons, Ałchíní reminded them. His voice calm but carrying authority. The water still flows. The game still runs. For how long? Challenged Niall. Already their hunters take more deer than they need. Already their axes bite into trees older than our grandfathers' grandfathers. The accusation wasn't without merit. Ałchíní had witnessed the settlers' wasteful ways himself. Yet he had also observed their struggles, their losses, their determination, not unlike the Apache's own. Before he could respond, a commotion at the canyon entrance drew everyone's attention. 2 scouts escorted a travel-worn Apache trader named Hanska, known for his journeys between settlements and tribes across the territory. "Forgive my interruption, Ałchíní," Hanska said with a respectful nod. "I bring news from the east that cannot wait until morning." Ałchíní gestured for him to speak freely. The blue-coat soldiers move supplies to the fort beyond the great mesa. More come with each moon. Hanska paused, taking a drink from the water offered by one of the women. "But I bring something else. Something strange from the settler town in the valley." The council leaned forward as one. Hanska continued, "For 3 nights, I traded with a family on the settlement's edge. Each evening, as the sun touched the western mountains, I heard it a woman's voice, singing songs that made even the crying white babies fall silent." "A singing settler woman?" Elder C scoffed. "This is your urgent news? Not just any singing," Hanska insisted. "The settlers say she is blind. Her eyes see nothing, but her ears hear everything. For 15 summers, she has sung to any child who suffers. They say her voice has healed fevers, calmed fears, eased pain." Ałchíní's hand tightened around the carved flute he still carried. "Where does this woman sing from?" "A small cabin at the north edge of the settlement, set apart from the others. The settlers call her Mother Sarah, though she has no children of her own." Hanska's voice lowered. "They say her husband was killed in the raid many seasons ago, yet she harbors no hatred. Her songs contain no bitterness." Niall made a dismissive gesture. "Settler superstitions. Their own medicine man cannot help them, so they create myths around an old blind woman." But Ałchíní had gone very still, his thoughts turning to his suffering daughter. "These songs, did you hear them yourself?" Hanska nodded. 3 evenings, like nothing I have heard before. Not their church songs, not their dance music, something older. Something that spoke to the spirit, not the ear." He hesitated. "The 2nd night, I saw a coyote, one of the clever ones that never approaches human dwellings, sitting near her cabin, listening until the last note faded." A significant look passed between Ałchíní and Ałchíní. In Apache tradition, when wild creatures behaved in unusual ways, the spirits were speaking. "I must hear these songs," Ałchíní said finally, rising to his feet. "You would enter the settler town?" Niall challenged, disbelief sharpening his words. "Risk yourself for a white woman's singing?" Ałchíní looked toward his daughter's lodge, where Kayona's silhouette showed her still tending their suffering child. "For Nasha, I would walk into the Blue Coats fort itself." As the council erupted in protest, Ałchíní turned to Ałchíní. "Prepare journey medicines. I leave when the moon rises." The hastily arranged town meeting had drawn nearly every resident of Cottonwood settlement to the modest church building. Dr. Thomas Wells watched from the back as Silas Crawford, a prosperous rancher who'd claimed the valley's prime grazing land, dominated the gathering from the pulpit, normally reserved for Reverend Miller. Apache sign less than 5 miles from town, Crawford announced, his voice carrying the authoritative twang of Texas Rangers he'd once ridden with. 2 hunting parties spotted their scouts watching the settlement from the eastern ridge. Thomas opened his leather-bound medical journal, thumbing to his latest entries on Sarah's lullabies. The careful notations recorded pulse rates before and after her singing, temperature changes in feverish children, respiration improvements in those with croup or chest ailments. Scientific evidence of what settlers dismissed as merely soothing. He half listened as Crawford continued his warnings. Lieutenant Harker, Crawford gestured to the young cavalry officer standing stiffly by the door, confirms increased activity throughout the territory. We need to organize night watches, limit travel after dusk, and what of Miss Bedford? Interrupted Martha Watson, the twins asleep against her shoulders. She sits out every evening, exposed and vulnerable. All eyes turned to Lieutenant James Harker, whose youthful features belied both his rank and his experience with frontier conflicts. At 28, he'd already witnessed the worst of what men could do to one another in the name of progress or preservation. Miss Bedford has been informed of the risks, Harker replied evenly. His Eastern education was evident in his careful pronunciation, though 3 years at the frontier outpost had weathered his once pristine uniform and idealism. She has declined military protection. Declined? Crawford snorted. A blind woman doesn't get to decline common sense. Either she stops those evening singing sessions, or what, Mr. Crawford? Thomas stood, his voice sharper than he'd intended. The room fell silent, surprised by the usually soft-spoken doctor's intervention. Sarah Bedford has been a fixture of this community since before most of you arrived. Her singing has helped half the children in this room through illness and distress. Crawford's eyes narrowed. No one's questioning her contributions, Doc, but these aren't normal times. Apache don't distinguish between combatants and civilians when they raid. Neither did the settlers who killed Chief Ałchíní's brother 3 years ago, Harker said quietly. Yet he's maintained peace in this region when other Apache bands have gone to war. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. Crawford recovered, quickly, turning the crowd's attention back to immediate concerns. All I'm saying is, the blind woman's singing might be drawing unwanted attention. It carries for miles in the evening air. Thomas closed his journal with deliberate care. I'll speak with Sarah myself, he offered, more to end the discussion and from any belief he could change her mind. As the meeting dissolved into smaller conversations about watch rotations and ammunition supplies, Lieutenant Harker approached. Thomas at the door. Doctor, he nodded, his voice low. A word? Outside, the lieutenant fell into step beside Thomas as they walked toward the doctor's small office adjacent to his home. You know she won't stop, don't you? Harker asked, once they were beyond earshot of the dispersing townsfolk. Thomas sighed, his bad leg aching after standing throughout the meeting. Sarah believes her singing serves a purpose greater than her own safety. She may be right. Harker's admission came reluctantly. 2 nights ago, I was patrolling the northern perimeter and saw something unusual. Thomas halted, turning to study the younger man's face. An Apache was watching her cabin, Harker continued. Not a young warrior, but someone of rank his. Headdress marked him as important. He simply stood in the shadows, listening, for nearly an hour. Did he see you? I believe so, but he made no aggressive move, and Harker hesitated. I chose not to confront him. Thomas absorbed this, understanding its significance. You didn't report it. Not officially. Harker looked toward the mountains, tinged pink with the approaching sunset. Doctor, I've served in 3 territories. I've seen what happens when fear drives decisions. The Cottonwood Valley has been peaceful when territory's all around us. Maybe there's a reason. Thomas thought of Sarah, of how she'd looked 12 years ago when he'd first arrived, a young widow, newly blinded, yet refusing to abandon the cabin she'd built with her husband. He remembered treating her during the fever that had taken her sight, how she'd asked him, delirious with pain, to describe the sunset one last time before darkness claimed her world forever. "She lost James in the '63 raid," Thomas said softly. "Did you know that?" Harker nodded. "It's in the fort records." "What isn't in those records is that she heard everything, the shots, the screams, the raiders' laughter. She crawled to him, blind, following the sound of his dying breaths." Thomas's voice grew distant with the retelling. When the relief party found her the next morning, she was singing to him, hours after he'd gone. Singing like she'd lost her mind. Yet she stayed, Harker observed. People expected her to return east to family. Instead, she taught herself to navigate by sound, by touch, by memory. And every evening since, she sat on that porch and sung first in grief, later in healing. Thomas looked toward the setting sun. She believes her purpose here transcends what happened to her. What happened to James? The lieutenant was silent for a long moment. Then, the Apache who watched her, I believe it was Chief Ałchíní, himself. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Crawford would use that information to demand military action. "Which is why this conversation never happened," Harker said firmly. "I need peace in this territory, Doctor. Not another senseless conflict." He straightened his uniform jacket. "Warn her if you must, but don't expect her to hide away. Some people serve a purpose they themselves don't fully understand." As Harker departed, Thomas noticed Sarah on her porch, punctual as the sunset, itself settling into her rocking chair with a wooden flute, a recent gift from a grateful father, resting across her lap. Her voice would soon rise in the evening air, carrying across the settlement and beyond, to ears both welcome and unknown. Sarah's fingers moved delicately through her silver-streaked hair, securing the ornate silver hairpin that had been her mother's. Though she could no longer see her reflection, the familiar ritual connected her to memories of a time when her mother had dressed her hair for Sunday services in their small Missouri town. The hairpin was impractical, perhaps a blind woman with no vanity to service. Yet Sarah maintained such habits as bridges to her past self. The evening carried the first hint of autumn crispness. Sarah settled into her rocking chair, wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, and began the melody she'd chosen for tonight, a lullaby her grandmother had sung, about sparrows finding safe nests as night fell. The settlement had grown quiet earlier than usual. Thomas had visited that afternoon, reluctantly conveying the town meeting's concerns. Sarah had listened patiently, then simply said, "The children still need songs, Thomas, especially when adults are afraid." Now, as her voice lifted into the dusk, Sarah sensed immediately that her usual audience had diminished. No doubt worried parents had kept children indoors, away from windows. Yet she continued, knowing her voice would reach those who needed it most. Halfway through her third song, Sarah's hands stilled on the arms of her rocking chair. Someone was approaching, not from the direction of the settlement, but from the scrubland beyond her small vegetable garden. The footsteps were deliberate, but light, nothing like the heavy boots of settlers or soldiers. She did not stop singing. Instead, she shifted smoothly into another melody, one her husband had taught her, learned from a Shoshone woman who'd helped his surveying party during a harsh winter. The footsteps halted at the edge of her porch. Sarah completed the verse, then let the final note fade into the gathering darkness before speaking. "The evening air carries your presence," she said calmly, her unseeing eyes directed toward the sound. "If you've come to listen, you're welcome to sit." For several heartbeats, only silence answered her. Then came the soft creak of weight, carefully testing her porch step. "Your songs reach far," came a man's voice, deep and measured with the careful. cadence of someone speaking a language not his first. To the hills and beyond. Sarah's hands remained relaxed in her lap. Music respects no boundaries, like the wind or the rain. Yet you sing alone, the man observed. Your people stay behind. Walls tonight. A slight smile touched Sarah's lips. Fear often builds walls where none are needed. Another silence, then the sound of the man moving to her left, maintaining distance, positioning himself where he could see both Sarah and the path from town. You are not afraid, he stated. Not a question. I lost my sight 12 years ago. Sarah replied. Fear was a luxury I couldn't afford while learning to live in darkness. She heard him shift position, sensed his scrutiny. You know what I am? He said finally. I know you're someone who appreciates music enough to risk coming closer to hear it. Sarah turned her face toward him. Would you like water? The journey from the hills must be thirsty work. She felt his surprise like a current in the air between them. Without waiting for an answer, she rose with practiced ease, moved to the small table beside her door, and poured water from the covered pitcher into a cup. She extended it in his general direction, her movements unhurried. After a moment's hesitation, she felt the cup taken from her hand, careful not to touch her fingers. You offer water to a stranger, he said, when your people speak of war. Sarah found her way back to her chair. Those who speak loudest of war often understand it least. Besides, you're not here for war. How do you know this? A man intent on violence doesn't pause to listen to lullabies, she answered simply. He doesn't approach alone in peace. And he doesn't stand night after night at the edge of my garden. Just listening. The cup clinked softly as he set it down on the porch railing. Your eyes see nothing, yet you saw me there. My ears have become my eyes. And you breathe differently from the settlers, deeper, more connected to the rhythm of the land. Sarah tilted her head. Why did my songs draw you from the safety of your people? The man was silent so long that Sarah thought he might leave without answering. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. I have a daughter. For many moons. She has not slept in peace. Her dreams are filled with shadows that medicine cannot chase away. He paused. When the trader spoke of a blind woman whose songs heal troubled children, I thought perhaps you hope to bring something back to her. Sarah finished for him. A song that might help where other remedies have failed. It was a foolish thought. No, Sarah said gently. It was a father's thought. Love makes us cross boundaries wisdom might advise against. She reached up and removed the silver hairpin, holding it in her palm. This was my mother's. When I was a child and couldn't sleep, she would sit beside me, wearing this pin, and sing until the night terrors retreated. She extended her hand. Take it to your daughter. Tell her it's been blessed by generations of mothers who stood guard against children's fears. The man made no move to take it. You offer a treasure to a stranger. Why? Because you're not truly a stranger, Sarah replied. You're a father worried for his child. In that, you and the settlers have more in common than either would admit. From the direction of town came the sound of voices, the night patrol making its rounds. Sarah sensed her visitor tensing, preparing to depart. Tomorrow evening, she said quickly. Bring your daughter. I'll sing for her directly. It would be dangerous, he replied, already backing away. Yes, Sarah agreed, and necessary. Some healing can only happen when we risk something of value. She smiled toward the sound of his retreating steps. Besides, I would like to know your name, Chief Ałchíní. His footsteps halted abruptly. In the distance, the patrol's lanterns swung closer. How do you know who I am? He asked, genuine surprise in his voice. The settlement has only one Apache chief wise enough to seek peace through understanding, Sarah answered. Tomorrow at sunset, chief of the generous heart, for your daughter. Without another word, he was gone, melting into the darkness beyond. her porch with barely a whisper of sound. As the patrol approached, Sarah tucked the silver hairpin back into her hair and began singing again, her voice masking any trace of her extraordinary visitor. Dawn painted the canyon walls with amber. Light as Ałchíní returned to the Apache encampment. He moved directly to his daughter's lodge, where Kiona sat weaving a dream catcher of willow branches and sinew. The existing one that hung above Nasha's sleeping mat, an intricate web adorned with eagle feathers and turquoise beads, had failed to trap the nightmares that plagued their child. "You went to the settler town," Kiona said softly, not a question but a statement of fact. After 17 years together, she could read the set of his shoulders, the tension in his jaw. Ałchíní crouched beside his daughter's sleeping form. Nasha's face, normally animated with curiosity and mischief, had grown thin and pale. Dark shadows beneath her eyes testified to months of disrupted sleep. "I spoke with the singing woman," he admitted, gently brushing a strand of hair from Nasha's forehead. Kiona's hands stilled on the dream catcher. At 39, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that had first drawn Ałchíní to her after the death of his first wife in childbirth. Though not Nasha's birth mother, Kiona had raised the girl as her own from infancy. "What manner of woman sings to other people's children each night?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice rather than judgment. "She has no sight," Ałchíní replied, yet she knew I was watching before I spoke, knew I was Apache, even knew my name and title. Kiona's eyes widened. "A spirit talker? Perhaps. Or perhaps just someone who has learned to hear what others miss." He described the encounter, the blind woman's lack of fear, her immediate understanding of his purpose, her offer of the silver hairpin. "She invited me to bring Nasha this evening," he concluded. "Into the settler town?" Kiona's voice sharpened, with protective instinct. "Husband, the risk." "I know the risk," Ałchíní interrupted gently. "I have weighed against watching our daughter fade like autumn leaves." He took Kiona's hand, placing it over his heart in their private gesture of deepest sincerity. Something in this woman's voice. It reaches places medicine cannot touch. A soft moan from Nasha interrupted them. The girl's breathing quickened, her small body tensing as another nightmare took hold. Kiona immediately began stroking her hair, murmuring traditional protection chants, but the child only grew more agitated. Ałchíní watched helplessly as his daughter whimpered in her sleep, fighting invisible enemies. 6 moons of this slow torture had tried every remedy in the tribe's considerable healing knowledge. The medicine man Ashki had exhausted his most powerful ceremonies. Even the dream catcher, woven with prayers and blessed herbs, hung uselessly above her. "We will take her at sunset," Kiona said finally, decision hardening her voice. "But not alone. 2 warriors will accompany us." Ałchíní nodded, relief softening the lines around his eyes. "Tebe and Hansk, they have level heads and steady hands." Outside the lodge, the camp was stirring to life. Smoke from cooking fires rose in thin columns against the morning sky. Children's laughter mingled with the rhythmic scraping of hides. Being tanned, the normal sounds of their people's existence continued while within this lodge. A very different battle raged out as they emerged. Naol approached with purposeful strides. The young warrior had clearly been waiting for Ałchíní's return. "The council must speak with you," he announced without preamble. "Elder C has called a gathering." Ałchíní straightened, assuming the mantle of chief that he sometimes set aside as father. "I will join them shortly." Niall's eyes flickered to the lodge behind them. "It concerns your midnight journey to the settler town." "Of course." "Little remained secret in the close-knit tribe. Then I will address their concerns directly." At the council fire, the 7 elders waited in a semicircle. Elder C, his face deeply creased from 90 summers of wind and sun, gestured for Ałchíní to take his place. "You visited the blind singing woman," C stated without prelude. I did, Ałchíní confirmed, meeting each elder's gaze in turn. Alone, without guards or counsel. This from Elder Maska, who had once been the tribe's most fearsome warrior before age claimed his strength. A chief who must hide behind warriors to speak with one blind woman is no chief at all. Ałchíní replied evenly. Niall, standing at the edge of the council circle, stepped forward. And what did you learn from this subtler woman than our own? Medicine men could not provide? The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. Several elders shifted uncomfortably. Such disrespect toward the chief was unusual. Even within the council's traditional space for open speech, Ałchíní regarded the young warrior calmly. I learned that wisdom sometimes comes from unexpected sources, that a woman with no sight may see clearer than those with eyes. Pretty words, Niall scoffed. While you seek wisdom from settlers, their soldiers establish new outposts on our hunting grounds. Their ranchers drive cattle through ancient burial sites. I am aware of these encroachments, Ałchíní replied, his voice hardening slightly, as I am aware that hasty action leads to needless death on both sides. Elder C raised a hand, silencing further argument from Niall. What do you intend, Ałchíní? Why seek out this singing woman? For Nasha, he answered simply. My daughter suffers beyond our medicine's reach. This woman's songs have healed settler children when their own healers failed. I go tonight to bring Nasha to hear these songs directly. A murmur ran through the council. Taking the chief's daughter into a settler town was unprecedented, a risk that bordered on recklessness. The people have followed your path of cautious peace, Elder Maska said gravely. We have trusted your vision when others called for war. But this to risk your only child, I risk her already by doing nothing, Ałchíní interrupted. Each night steals more of her spirit. Would you have me watch her fade when a possible remedy exists just beyond our mountains? Ashki, who had joined the council silently, spoke for the first time. There is power in music that transcends our understanding. The Great Spirit speaks in many voices, through many vessels. The old medicine man touched the pouch of healing herbs at his belt. I will prepare a medicine bundle for the child's journey, and for the blind singer, a gift of our own healing ways. Niall stepped forward again. If you do this thing, if you take your daughter among the settlers, you risk more than one child. You risk all our children's future by showing weakness. True strength, Ałchíní replied, rising to his full height, is knowing when to extend a hand rather than raise a weapon. He looked around the council circle. I go at sunset with Kiona and 2 warriors. The matter is decided. As he walked away, Ałchíní felt the weight of the tribe's concerns on his shoulders. Yet alongside that burden rested his greater responsibility to his suffering daughter, whose small hand had once been strong enough to lead him through his own darkest. Days after her mother's death dot behind him, the council dissolved into heated debate, but his path was set. As the sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the canyon, preparations began for the evening journey to the blind singer's porch. The town council chamber, a plain room adjoining the general store, had never felt so suffocating to Thomas Wells. Afternoon sun streamed through dusty windows, illuminating the official settlement decree that Silas Crawford had just finished reading aloud. The document, bearing the hastily gathered signatures of the council members, prohibited activities that might attract or encourage native presence near the settlement borders. This is absurd, Thomas said, struggling to keep his voice measured. You've crafted a decree specifically targeting one blind woman. Crawford folded the paper with deliberate precision. At 53, the former Texas Ranger carried himself with the hard-earned authority of a man who had survived 3 decades of frontier violence. The long scar that bisected his left cheek, courtesy of a Comanche lance in his younger days. As he clenched his jaw, "This isn't personal, Doc," It's practical. Lieutenant Harker's scouts confirmed a Apache movement last night within a quarter-mile of the settlement. Crawford looked around the chamber at the 5 other council members. And where were they closest to? Miss Bedford's cabin. Thomas gripped his walking stick tighter. Correlation isn't causation, Mr. Crawford. Basic scientific principle. Save your fancy schooling, Crawford dismissed. The fact remains her singing carries for miles. We can't have her unwittingly serving as a beacon for every Apache within. Earshot. Reverend Miller, whose gentle demeanor usually balanced Crawford's harsher judgments, cleared his throat. Perhaps we could offer Miss Bedford accommodations closer to town center? For her protection and— She won't leave that cabin, Thomas interrupted. You all know that. Then she stops the singing, Crawford said flatly. At least until the Apache move on to winter grounds. Thomas looked to the other council members, storekeeper Henry Jenkins, blacksmith Paul Greaves, rancher Elias Foster, and schoolteacher Edith Simmons. Their averted eyes told him all he needed to know about where their votes would fall. I'll deliver your decree, Thomas said finally, holding out his hand for the document, though I doubt it will carry much weight with her. Crawford withheld the paper. This isn't a request, Doc. It's a directive from the duly appointed town council. Miss Bedford may have special circumstances, but she's still subject to community decisions. Special circumstances? Thomas repeated incredulously. Sarah Bedford was here when this settlement was nothing but 3 cabins and a dream. She's nursed half your children through colic and fever. When cholera swept through 2 summers ago, she sat with the sick and dying, singing comfort to them when others fled. No one's disputing her contributions, Crawford replied, his patience visibly thinning. But times change. Circumstances change. The door to the council chamber swung open, and Martha Watson strode in, her usual timidity replaced by righteous indignation. Is it true? She demanded, looking around the room. You're ordering Sarah to stop her evening songs? Crawford stood. Straighter. Mrs. Watson, this is a closed council meeting. Half the town's talking about it already. Martha cut him off. Have any of you considered what this means for our children? For mothers at their wits' end with colicky babies, or sick toddlers? Mrs. Watson, Edith Simmons interjected gently. We understand your concern, but there's a larger safety issue at stake. Martha's chin lifted. My Jacob wouldn't be alive without Sarah's songs. Last winter's pneumonia had him at death's door, until she sang through 3 nights straight at his bedside. Her voice wavered, but held firm. And I'm not the only one. Ask the Hendersons, the Clarks, the Millers. Folks can still visit her during daylight hours, Crawford countered. No one's saying she can't sing indoors to specific children. The issue is these nightly outdoor performances that carry across the valley. Lieutenant Harker appeared in the doorway behind Martha, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Crawford, a word? Crawford excused himself, stepping outside with the young officer. Through the window, Thomas observed their animated conversation. Noting how Harker's normally disciplined posture had stiffened with what appeared to be disagreement, Martha moved closer to Thomas, lowering her voice. There's more happening here, isn't there, Doctor? Something they're not saying. Thomas nodded almost imperceptibly. Crawford lost family to Apache raids in Texas. Old wounds, long memories. And convenient targets, Martha added shrewdly. Door reopened as Crawford returned, his expression thunderous. Meeting adjourned, he announced. I'll deliver the council's decree myself. That won't be necessary. Thomas stepped forward. As Miss Bedford's physician, I should— This isn't a medical matter, Crawford interrupted. Lieutenant Harker will accompany me as representative of military authority. Harker's face revealed nothing, but Thomas noted the slight nod. The lieutenant directed his way, a silent message that Sarah would not face Crawford's intimidation alone. As the council dispersed, Thomas found himself walking alongside Martha. toward Sarah's cabin. The afternoon had cooled, a harbinger of the autumn to come. "She won't stop singing," Martha said with certainty. "Not for Crawford, not for anyone." "I know," Thomas sighed. "And that's what worries me." They arrived at Sarah's cabin to find her calmly watering the hardy marigolds that lined her porch. Steps. Her movements were precise, each plant receiving exactly the care it needed, despite her inability to see them. "Thomas," she greeted him without turning, "and Martha. How are the twins today?" "Cutting teeth and letting the whole settlement know it," Martha replied with weary affection. Sarah smiled, setting down her watering can. "Chamomile and clove oil on the gums. And bring them by this evening. I've a new song that works wonders for teething pain." Thomas stepped forward. "Sarah, there's something you should know. Crawford and the council have drafted an order for me to cease my evening singing," she finished for him. "Yes, I heard about their meeting. News travels fast," Martha observed. "In a settlement this size, secrets are as rare as silence," Sarah replied, her unseeing eyes directed toward the distant mountains. "Crawford and Lieutenant Harker are on their way here now. I can hear their horses on the north trail." Thomas marveled, as he often did, at how Sarah's other senses had sharpened to compensate for her blindness. "Sarah, Crawford won't be swayed by reason or sentiment. He's determined to silence what he fears." Sarah nodded. "But my voice is not his to command, Thomas. It never has been." "They could force you to leave," Martha said worriedly. Sarah's hand found the porch rail, her fingers tracing the weathered wood her husband had shaped 15 years earlier. "This land was paid for in blood and sacrifice. My husband's life, my sight." Her voice remained gentle despite the steel beneath her words. "No decree can move me from this spot." In the distance, hoofbeats grew louder. Sarah turned toward Thomas, her expression serene but determined. "Some songs must be sung, regardless of who forbids them," she said simply. "Some purposes transcend the fears of men like Silas Crawford." As Crawford and Harker appeared on the horizon, Thomas realized that the threats to Sarah came not just from outside the settlement, but from within, from the very community she had nurtured and healed for. 15 years. Twilight descended over the valley, painting the landscape in deepening shades of purple and blue. Sarah sat in her rocking chair, seemingly oblivious to the tensions that had simmered throughout the settlement since Crawford's visit that afternoon. The confrontation had gone much as Thomas expected. Crawford's blustering demands met with Sarah's gentle but immovable resolve. "You're defying a direct order from the town council," Crawford had warned, his voice pitched to carry to curious neighbors who had gathered within earshot. "I'm continuing a service that has brought comfort to this community for 15 years. Sarah had replied evenly. "The children still need songs, Mr. Crawford, perhaps now more than ever." Lieutenant Harker had remained mostly silent, intervening only when Crawford's frustration threatened to boil over into something more aggressive. "The military has no jurisdiction over civilian musical performances, Mr. Crawford," he'd noted dryly, "especially on private property." Now, as darkness gathered, Sarah's fingers traced the small leather pouch that Thomas had brought her after the confrontation of Ma, gift from his personal collection of medicinal herbs. "Lavender and chamomile," he'd explained, "to help soothe the children, and you, perhaps, after today's unpleasantness." Sarah had smiled, tucking the pouch into her apron pocket. "I suspect I'll have unexpected guests this evening, Thomas. Best if you're not here when they arrive." He'd understood immediately. The Apache chief and his daughter, Sarah had confirmed, a child suffering beyond their medicine's reach. Thomas had departed reluctantly, torn between professional curiosity and the knowledge that his presence might complicate an already precarious situation. "I'll make sure the night patrol avoids your section of the perimeter," he'd promised. Now, as the first stars appeared overhead, Sarah began to sing a low, gentle melody that spoke of safe harbors and peaceful rest. Her defiance of Crawford's decree had not gone unnoticed. Lights in nearby cabins had extinguished early, windows shuttered tight, whether in solidarity or fear, she couldn't know. Halfway through her second song, Sarah paused, her head tilting slightly toward the darkness beyond her garden. "You've come," she said simply. For a moment, only cricket song answered her. Then came the soft tread of moccasined feet, and Ałchíní emerged from the shadows, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. Behind him followed a slender woman, Kiona. Sarah guessed carrying a small bundle that could only be their daughter. 2 warriors flanked them, alert and watchful. "The soldiers patrol the eastern edge," Ałchíní said quietly. "But not here. Why?" "A friend ensures they look elsewhere tonight," Sarah replied. "Please, bring your daughter closer." Kiona hesitated, her protective instincts warring with desperate hope. Ałchíní placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and together they approached the porch steps. The warriors remained at the garden's edge, barely visible in the gathering. "Darkness, may we join you?" Ałchíní asked formally. "You honor my home," Sarah replied, recognizing the cultural significance of the exchange dot as they ascended the steps. Sarah could hear the labored breathing of the child, quick, shallow gasps, punctuated by soft whimpers. The sound tugged at her heart with painful familiarity. "Her name is Nasha," Kiona said, her voice revealing both strength and vulnerability. "It means little owl in our language." "A night creature," Sarah smiled, "wise and watchful." "Once," Kiona agreed sadly, "before the shadows took her rest." Sarah gestured to the bench beside her rocking chair. "Please, sit with her here." As they settled the child between them, Sarah reached out slowly, telegraphing her movements. "May I touch her, to feel her spirit's rhythm?" After a moment's hesitation, Kiona guided Sarah's hand to Nasha's forehead. The skin beneath her fingers burned with fever, yet the child shivered as though chilled. Sarah recognized the familiar pattern of exhaustion, so profound it manifested as physical illness. "How long since she truly slept?" Sarah asked. 6 moons, Ałchíní answered. "Since the soldiers burned the sacred grove near our summer hunting grounds." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. "She witnessed this?" "From a hiding place," Kiona confirmed. "She watched as ancient prayer trees became harsh, trees that held our ancestors' spirits, where she had been taught to leave offerings since she could walk." Sarah withdrew a small handcrafted medicine pouch. From her pocket, not Thomas's gift, but something older, crafted years ago when her own night terrors had followed her into blindness. Inside were dried herbs gathered from both settler gardens and wild meadows, blessed by her own quiet prayers. "This contains sage, sweetgrass, and cedar," she explained, placing it in Ałchíní's palm, "combined with lavender and chamomile from my garden. The blending of our traditions may offer what neither can provide alone." Ałchíní examined the pouch, then passed it to Kiona, who carefully tucked it beneath Nasha's blanket. "Now," Sarah said softly, "I will sing for Nasha directly. A song I composed after losing my sight, when darkness seemed to have no end." She began without further preamble, her voice pitched low and intimate, meant for one small listener rather than carrying across the settlement. The melody moved in unexpected patterns, neither purely Apache nor settler in origin, but something new, something that spoke to the spaces between worlds, where a child's spirit might become lost. As the song continued, Sarah sensed the gradual easing of Nasha's breathing. The child's small body, initially rigid with tension, began to soften. Kiona made a small sound of surprise as Nasha turned toward Sarah's voice, her first voluntary movement in what must have been days. On the far side of the settlement, a dog barked once, twice signaling movement near the perimeter. Sarah paused briefly, listening intently, then continued her song without comment. Ałchíní signaled silently to his warriors. who melted deeper into the shadows. From the direction of town came the distant sound of boots on packed earth, the night patrol, off their usual route. Lieutenant Harker's voice carried faintly on, the night air deliberately loud. Nothing to report on the north edge. Let's circle back toward town. Sarah's song never faltered as the patrol passed in the distance. Beside her, Ałchíní and Kiona remained perfectly still, their breathing synchronized with her melody as if they too were being lulled into a peaceful state. When Sarah finally let the last note fade into silence, Nasha lay sleeping peacefully. In Kiona's arms, her small face relaxed for the first time in months. "She sleeps," Kiona whispered, wonder and cautious hope mingling in her voice. "Teach me this song," Ałchíní requested quietly, "so that her mother may sing it in our lodge." "I will," Sarah promised. "But first, let her rest here a while longer. True healing comes with deep sleep." As they sat in companionable silence, the unlikely gathering on a blind woman's porch represented something unprecedented in the valley's history. Moment of trust that defied generations of suspicion and bloodshed. The moon had risen fully, casting silver light across Sarah's porch as Nasha continued to sleep peacefully in Kiona's arms. The child's breathing had deepened, her small body occasionally twitching with normal dreams rather than nightmares. Ałchíní watched his daughter with a father's mixture of hope and protective vigilance. "The song," he said quietly to Sarah. "It is not like other settler music." Sarah smiled, her fingers finding the worn leather cover of a small book in her apron pocket. "No, it's something different. After I lost my sight, I began creating melodies that described what I could no longer see: sunrise, children's faces, mountain shadows." She withdrew the book, its pages marked with raised dots and lines that her fingers could read. "This songbook contains them all." Ałchíní studied the strange markings. "You can read this? With your fingers?" "Yes. A system created for the blind. The raised patterns tell me which notes to sing, how long to hold them." She ran her fingertips across a page with practiced precision. "This is the song I just sang for Nasha, what I call the path through darkness." Kiona leaned forward, fascinated. "Our people have songs carried only in memory, passed from mother to daughter. Nothing that can be touched like this." "Different ways to preserve what matters," Sarah nodded. "Would you like to learn it? For when Nasha wakes in your lodge?" "Yes," Kiona replied without hesitation. Sarah began teaching the melody line by line, guiding Kiona through the unusual intervals and rhythms. The Apache woman proved a quick study, her voice naturally finding the emotional core of the lullaby. Ałchíní watched with quiet appreciation as the two women created something new between them, a bridge of music, spanning cultural divides. The unexpected sound of footsteps approaching from town interrupted their impromptu lesson. Ałchíní tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. The warriors at the garden's edge melted further into shadows. Arrows knocked, but not drawn. "It's just Thomas," Sarah said calmly, recognizing the distinctive gait slightly. Uneven from his war injury, Dr. Wells appeared at the garden gate, medical bag in hand. He stopped abruptly at the sight of the Apache family on Sarah's porch, his professional composure momentarily faltering. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I came to check on you after Crush's assessment. Not hostile, but wary." "Thomas," Sarah said smoothly, "this is Chief Ałchíní of the White Mountain Apache, his wife Kiona, and their daughter Nasha, who has been unwell. Chief, this is Dr. Thomas Wells, our settlement's physician and my dear friend." The formality of her introduction seemed to reset the tension. Thomas inclined his head respectfully. "I've heard of your leadership, Chief Ałchíní. Your efforts to maintain peace in this territory are well known at Fort Britain." "The peace benefits both our peoples," Ałchíní replied evenly, "when it is honored equally." Thomas nodded, acknowledging the justified qualification. His gaze moved to the sleeping child, professional interest overtaking initial surprise. "Your daughter has been ill?" Kiona drew Nasha closer protectively, but Ałchíní raised a hand in a calming gesture. "Not illness of the body, dreams that will not let her rest. For 6 moons she has known little peace." Thomas approached slowly, setting his medical bag on the porch steps to signal his peaceful intentions. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward N.A. Sichadat after a silent exchange with her husband. Kiona reluctantly loosened her embrace, allowing Thomas to gently examine the sleeping child. His touch was professional, but tender as he checked her pulse, felt her forehead, and observed her breathing. "Her physical symptoms appear to be effects of prolonged sleep deprivation," he said finally. "The human body cannot endure such disruption." "Indefinitely." He glanced at Sarah. "Your singing helped her sleep?" "She responded to The Path Through Darkness," Sarah confirmed. "The melody I composed after losing my sight." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Music affects the mind in ways medicine cannot always reach. He reached into his bag and withdrew a small bottle. "This is a mild tincture of valerian and passion flower. Entirely herbal. Nothing that would harm a child. It may help extend the peaceful sleep she's found tonight." Ałchíní regarded the bottle skeptically. "Your medicines are strange to us." "As yours would be to me," Thomas acknowledged. "But I believe our aims are the same, the child's well-being." After a moment's consideration, Ałchíní accepted the bottle, tucking it into a pouch at his belt. The gesture represented a profound trust, not missed by either man. "Thank you," the chief said simply. A new sound drew everyone's attention. Nasha stirring, her eyes fluttering open for the first time. The child looked around in momentary confusion, then focused on Sarah with unexpected clarity. "The singing lady," she whispered in Apache, her voice hoarse from disuse. Kiona gasped softly, tears filling her eyes. These were the first words her daughter had spoken in weeks. Sarah, understanding the reaction, if not the words, smiled in the child's direction. "Welcome back, little owl," she said gently. Nasha studied Sarah's unseeing eyes with a child's direct curiosity. "You cannot see, but you found me in the dark place," she said in halting English, surprising her parents. "I know those dark places well," Sarah replied. "I learned to find my way through them, just as you can." The child nodded solemnly, then turned to Ałchíní. "Father, she sings the colors back." The chief looked startled, then deeply moved by this description. He placed his hand on his daughter's head in a gesture of profound blessing. "Yes, little one, she does." Thomas observed the interaction with professional interest, but Sarah sensed something more in his attention, a growing understanding that transcended his medical training. She reached for her songbook again. "Kiona, would you like to continue learning the melody? Nasha can tell us if we capture it correctly." As the impromptu lesson resumed, Thomas settled on the porch steps, his physician's instincts keeping him close to his unexpected patient. Ałchíní moved to sit beside him, the two men finding an unanticipated common ground in their shared concern for the child. "You're Sarah Bedford," Ałchíní said quietly. "She is a medicine woman in your tribe?" Thomas smiled at the apt description. "Not officially. But yes, in many ways, she heals what conventional medicine cannot touch." Above them, the voices of Sarah and Kiona blended in the lullaby. One teaching, one learning, creating something that belonged fully to neither culture, but offered healing to both. The settlement maps, spread across Silas Crawford's desk, were worn. At the creases, marked with annotations from years of territorial expansion. His finger traced the northern perimeter where Sarah Bedford's cabin stood, now circled in bold ink and labeled Point of Concern. The lamp oil was burning low, casting long shadows across the room as midnight approached. "You're certain of what you saw?" Crawford asked, not looking up from the maps. Jeb Haskell, a young ranch hand with more ambition than sense, stood nervously by the door. Yes, sir, Mr. Crawford. Apache on Miss Bedford's porch, plain as day. The blind woman was teaching them songs, like they was neighbors come to visit. Crawford's jaw tightened, the scar on his cheek whitening. How many? 4 I could see. 2 up on the porch looked to be the chief himself and a woman. 2 warriors in the shadows. Haskell shifted his. Wait. Lieutenant Harker's patrol passed right by, didn't even stop to investigate. This final detail seemed to confirm something Crawford had suspected. He straightened, folding the map with deliberate precision. You've done right by the settlement. Haskell, not everyone understands the Apache like those of us who've seen what they're capable of. The young man nodded eagerly. My pa lost 2 brothers to Apache raids back in Texas, sir. I know what's at stake. Crawford reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope. I need this delivered to Fort Brennan. Tonight, it's addressed to Colonel Wilson directly. He held the envelope just out of Haskell's reach. This can't go through regular channels. Lieutenant Harker seems to have divided loyalties. Haskell took the envelope, tucking it securely inside his jacket. I'll ride out now, sir. Be at the fort by dawn. After the young man departed, Crawford sat alone, staring at the altered map. 15 years he'd worked to build this settlement into something substantial, to bring civilization to this wild corner of the territory. He wouldn't let one blind woman's misguided sympathy undermine everything. Lieutenant James Harker was completing his night patrol log when a rider thundered past the guardhouse, heading east toward Fort Brennan. The glimpse was brief, but enough to recognize Jeb Haskell, one of Crawford's loyal ranch hands. Peters, he called to the sentry. Did Haskell have dispatch orders? No, sir, the young soldier replied. Said he was on personal business for Mr. Crawford. Harker's military instincts, honed through bitter experience, recognized the familiar pattern of events being set in motion beyond his control. He quickly finished the log entry and headed toward Dr. Wells' home on the eastern edge of the settlement. Doctor answered on the 3rd knock, fully dressed despite the late hour, suggesting he had only recently returned from somewhere. Lieutenant, Thomas greeted him with cautious formality. Crawford knows, Harker said without preamble, about the Apache visitors at Miss Bedford's. He's just sent a rider to Fort Brennan, bypassing my authority. Thomas's expression tightened. Colonel Wilson? Most likely. Crawford served with him in Texas. Harker stepped inside, lowering his voice. Wilson doesn't share my approach to Apache relations. He's from the only good Indian school of thought. How much time do we have? Haskell left minutes ago. Round. Trip to the fort and back with a response. Harker calculated quickly. 12 hours at best. Less if they dispatch a cavalry unit immediately. Thomas moved to his desk, pulling out paper and pen. I need to warn Sarah. Warning may not be enough, Harker cautioned. Colonel Wilson won't distinguish between hostile and peaceful Apache. If he finds Chief Ałchíní anywhere near the settlement, They. Implications hung heavily between them. Both men understood the brutal mathematics of frontier violence. How one incident could escalate into a cycle of revenge that would consume the entire valley. The chief and his family left an hour ago, Thomas said. But they'll return. Nasha responded to Sarah's singing in a way their own medicine couldn't achieve. A father desperate to heal his child won't be deterred by political boundaries. Harker paced the small room, military training wrestling with his personal sense of justice. I can delay any response from the fort by insisting on proper protocols, but that won't stop Crawford. He's gathering support among the settlers who lost family to raids years ago. Those raids weren't even by Ałchíní's people, Thomas objected. Fear doesn't concern itself with such distinctions. Harker replied grimly. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas opened it to find Martha Watson, her shawl pulled. tight against the night chill. "Doctor," she said urgently, "someone nailed this to Sarah's door within the hour." She handed him a crude note, the letters jagged and threatening. "Apache lover will hang with Apache." Thomas passed the note to Harker, whose expression darkened. "Coward's work," the lieutenant muttered. "Where is Miss Bedford now?" "At her cabin," Martha replied. "She refused to come with me, said leaving would only confirm guilt where none exists." Harker shook his head in frustrated admiration. "Brave woman. Stubborn, but brave." "She needs protection," Thomas insisted. "My official capacity is limited by Crawford's influence with Colonel Wilson," Harker admitted. "But perhaps—" He straightened suddenly, decision made. "Dr. Wells, would you offer Miss Bedford sanctuary in your home?" As her physician, concerned. "For her health?" Thomas blinked in surprise. "Of course, but she's already refused Martha's similar offer. She might reconsider if she understood the full situation." Harker turned to Martha. "Mrs. Watson, can you gather some of the women who've benefited from Miss Bedford's help over the years? A show of community support might persuade her." Martha nodded firmly. "The Henderson sisters, Mrs. Miller, the Clarks, all have children who'd have died without Sarah's care during illnesses." "Good," Harker said. "Meanwhile, I need to send a scout to warn Chief Ałchíní. If Crawford has informed Colonel Wilson that the chief was in the settlement, the fort may dispatch troops to the Apache camp directly. Is that wise?" Thomas asked. "If you're caught. Warning them ... It's necessary," Harker replied simply. "I've served 3 years in this territory, long enough to know that Ałchíní is the only reason we haven't seen the bloodshed that's consumed other regions. If he's arrested or worse, we'll have full-scale war within a month." As Harker departed to find a trustworthy scout, Thomas finished his warning note to Sarah. The situation had deteriorated faster than any of them had anticipated. Crawford's fear and old hatreds had found fertile ground in the settlement's recent anxieties. "Martha," Thomas said gravely, "when you gather the women, tell them to bring their children. Sarah won't leave her post for her own safety, but she's never turned away a child in need." Martha understood immediately. "A reason she can't refuse." "Exactly." Thomas sealed the note, his expression grim. "The next 24 hours will determine whether this valley sees peace or bloodshed for years to come." Dawn brought no solace to Sarah's small cabin. Despite Thomas's urgent message and Martha's impassioned pleas, she had refused to abandon her home. "If I leave," she had explained gently but firmly, "I validate their fear and hatred. Some stands must be made where we are planted." Now, as morning light filtered through her windows, Sarah moved about her familiar space, fingers tracing the edges of furniture, the rough texture of the stone fireplace, the smooth, worn handle of her broom. She had awakened with absolute certainty that today would irrevocably alter the path of her life, though in what way remained unclear. Not the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders, moving with purpose, but not haste, reached her sensitive ears. Not military. Their rhythm lacked the disciplined cadence of cavalry. Not settlers either. These horses moved with the lighter step of animals, bred for endurance rather than farm work. Sarah set down her teacup and moved confidently to her door, opening it before the riders had reached her garden gate. The sudden cessation of mourning, birdsong told her as much as the sound of the horses. Something unusual had arrived. "Miss Bedford." Lieutenant Harker's voice carried across her garden. "You have visitors of significant importance." Sarah stepped onto her porch, head tilted in curiosity. "Please bring them to the porch, Lieutenant." The creak of saddle leather and soft footfalls on packed earth told her that several people were approaching. Then came the unmistakable presence of Ałchíní, his voice pitched low as he murmured something in Apache to his companions. "Chief Ałchíní," Sarah greeted him. "I did not expect you so soon after last night." Events moved quickly, he replied. The young lieutenant's warrior brought warning before first light. Your settlement leader has sent for soldiers. Sarah nodded gravely. I feared as much when they nailed threats to my door. You are in danger because of our visit, Ałchíní stated, regret evident in his voice. I've lived with danger since losing my sight, Sarah replied pragmatically. It's merely taken a different form. A new voice, elderly, deeply resonant with age and wisdom, spoke in Apache. Ałchíní translated, Elder C says your spirit shines brightly for one who walks in physical darkness. Sarah inclined her head. Respectfully, please, all of you, join me on the porch. Lieutenant, will you stay as witness? I believe that would be wise, Harker agreed, his tone suggesting he understood this was no ordinary visit. The weathered boards of Sarah's porch creaked under the weight of several visitors. From their movements, she discerned 4 Apache had come with Ałchíní, the elder who had spoken, another older person who moved with the careful steps of advanced age, and 2 younger individuals whose posture suggested authority. The tribal council honors your home, Ałchíní explained as they arranged themselves in a semicircle. Never before have they come to a settler dwelling. Sarah recognized the profound significance of this visit. I am humbled by your presence. How is Nasha this morning? She slept through the night for the first time in 6 moons. Ałchíní replied, undisguised gratitude in his voice. She woke singing your melody. Sarah smiled. Children absorb music like dry earth takes rain. The elderly voice spoke again at length. When he finished, Ałchíní began what was clearly a formal translation. Elder C, who has seen 92 summers and guided our people through wars and peace, says, we have witnessed something rare, a bridge between worlds built by songs. Instead of words, by healing instead of hurting. The Apache have a saying that music carries the voice of the Great Spirit more purely than speech. Last night, we heard this truth. Sarah listened intently, sensing they were approaching the true purpose of this unprecedented gathering. Ałchíní continued, because of what happened with Nasha, the council has made a decision that has no precedent among our people. A pause waited with significance. We offer you sanctuary in our canyon village. Sarah's hands, resting in her lap, grew still with surprise. Sanctuary? More than sanctuary, Ałchíní clarified. We offer you a place of honor, keeper of the children's songs, one who preserves the healing melodies for generations to come, teaching our women to sing as you taught Kiona. Lieutenant Harker made a small sound of astonishment. Sarah heard him shift position, no doubt struggling to absorb the historical significance of what was transpiring. Such an honor is usually bestowed only on those born to the tribe, Sarah said carefully. The position has been empty for 3 generations, replied another voice, female, elderly but strong. No one has shown the gift until you. The songs are being lost. Ałchíní translated, Medicine woman Lelu believes your blindness allows you to hear music that exists between our worlds. Music most of us have forgotten how to hear. Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing upon her. The offer was extraordinary, unprecedented in the complicated history of settler and Apache relations. She thought of her 15 years in this cabin, the memories it held, the purpose it had given her after James's death, and her loss of sight. Your generous offer honors me beyond words, she said finally. But this cabin, this place it holds, the echo of my husband's voice, the memory of his hands building our home. It has been my anchor when darkness claimed my world. We understand the power of place, Ałchíní assured her. Yet sometimes, the greatest honor we can give our ancestors is to carry their spirit to new ground when the old becomes dangerous. From his pocket, he withdrew something that made a distinctive wooden sound as it touched the porch floor between them, a ceremonial pipe. Sarah realized, recognizing its significance from James's descriptions of peace councils he had witnessed. This pipe has been smoked at every important treaty and decision of our people for 6 generations, Ałchíní explained. Today, we offer it as a symbol of our sincerity and respect." Lieutenant Harker cleared his throat. "Miss Bedford, I feel obligated to inform you that the military situation is deteriorating. Crawford's message to Colonel Wilson claimed you were harboring hostile Apache. The colonel has authorized a detachment to investigate." "Investigate," Sarah repeated, understanding the euphemism. "When?" "They could arrive by midday tomorrow," Harker admitted. "My authority has been superseded." Elder C spoke again, briefly but forcefully. Ałchíní translated, "The wise one says, 'Time grows short like shadows at dusk.' Your song has already begun among our people through Nash's healing. Will you let it continue, or will it end here?" Sarah rose from her chair, moving to the edge of her porch. Her fingers found the weathered railing, tracing the wood her husband had shaped. 15 years of memories pressed against her children's laughter, mother's gratitude, the rhythm of seasons marked by songs that changed with winter's chill or summer's heat. "I need one night," she said finally, turning back to her visitors. "One night to say goodbye to this place that has been my world. By tomorrow's dawn, I will have my answer." Ałchíní stood. "We will send 2 warriors to wait in the hills beyond your garden. If you choose to come, they will escort you safely before the soldiers arrive." As they prepared to depart, the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps caused everyone to tense. Sarah recognized the distinctive gait immediately. "It's only Thomas," she assured them. Dr. Wells appeared at the garden gate, stopping abruptly at the sight of the Apache delegation on Sarah's porch. His breathing suggested he had hurried. "Sarah," he called, concern evident in his voice. "Crawford has gathered a group of armed men. They're coming to—" He broke off, finally registering Lieutenant Harker's presence alongside the Apache elders. The lieutenant stepped forward. "How soon, Doctor?" "Within the hour," Thomas replied grimly. "They're calling it a Citizens Committee for Settlement Safety." Sarah understood the gravity of the situation immediately. Her decision could no longer wait until dawn. Lieutenant Harker's steady authority had diffused the immediate threat. When Crawford's Citizens Committee arrived at Sarah's cabin, they found not only the respected doctor, but also a uniformed army officer standing on her porch. "This property remains under military protection until Colonel Wilson's detachment arrives tomorrow," Harker had informed them, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. "Any civilian action would constitute interference with military operations." Crawford had been forced to retreat, though his parting words carried unmistakable menace. "Dawn tomorrow, then. The colonel will see things differently." The Apache delegation had departed separately, using paths known only to their people, invisible to settler eyes. Before leaving, Ałchíní had spoken privately with Sarah. "We will wait in the sacred canyon until first light. After that, we must return to our people." Now, as twilight deepened into night, Sarah sat alone in her cabin, her fingers tracing the smooth metal surface of her husband's pocket watch. The timepiece had stopped at 2:17, the moment a raider's bullet had found James's heart 12 years ago. She had kept it unwound, preserving that moment not from morbid attachment to grief, but as a reminder that time itself could be both enemy and friend. The familiar dimensions of her cabin embraced her like an old friend, the 14 steps from door to stove, the slight warp in the floorboard near the rocking chair, the small nail where James had planned to hang a mirror she would never need. Every inch measured and memorized during the long adjustment to blindness. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "It's Thomas," came the doctor's voice. Sarah tucked the watch into her pocket and moved confidently to the door. "Come in." Thomas entered, bringing with him the scents of pipe tobacco and medical antiseptic that had become his signature. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle with concern. "I'm remembering," Sarah replied simply, returning to her chair. 15 years of life in these walls. Thomas settled into the chair opposite hers, the one James had built for company we'll have someday. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that the cabin had become a gathering place only after its builder was gone. Crawford won't stop, Thomas said after a moment of respectful silence. Even if Colonel Wilson proves reasonable, which is doubtful. Crawford has stirred up too much fear to back down now. Sarah nodded. Fear is a poor foundation for decisions, yet most are built upon it. The Apache offered ... double quotes. Thomas hesitated. It's unprecedented, isn't it? So Lieutenant Harker assures me, Sarah confirmed. No settler has ever been invited to live among them as anything but a captive. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering. Darkness, the same bird that had serenaded her porch every spring since she'd lost her sight. You're considering it, Thomas observed, a complex emotion coloring his voice. Sarah's fingers found the pocket watch again. I've spent 12 years honoring James's memory by staying where he died. Perhaps it's time to honor him by carrying his spirit of exploration forward. If you go, I may never see you again, Thomas said quietly. The simple statement revealed what had remained unspoken between them for 3 years. Sarah's expression softened with gentle understanding. Thomas, she said carefully, your feelings have always been clear to me, even without sight to read your face. The doctor shifted, uncomfortably. I never wanted to burden you with them. They were never a burden, Sarah assured him. Just not returned in the same way, he finished for her. I've always known that. Sarah reached across the space between them, finding his hand with unerring accuracy. In another life, perhaps. But my heart has room only for the children now, for the healing my songs can bring. Thomas turned his hand to hold hers briefly, which is why the Apache offer makes sense. They recognize your gift in a way the settlement never fully has. A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind only possible between people who understand each other's boundaries and respect them. If I go, Sarah said finally, would you visit? As a physician, you could request permission to study Apache medicine. Hope flickered in Thomas's voice. Colonel Wilson is due for transfer next spring. His replacement might be more amenable to peaceful interactions. The night deepened around them as they spoke of practical matters. What few possessions Sarah would take, how messages might be exchanged. The political complexities that would follow her decision got another knock, softer than Thomas's, interrupted them. Martha, Sarah identified immediately. The young widow entered, her twins asleep against her shoulders. Miss Sarah, she said, voice trembling slightly, I heard what happened today. The whole settlement's talking. Come sit, Sarah invited. Are the little ones well? They are, thanks to you. Martha settled on the bench near the fire. Miss Sarah, the women of the settlement want you to know that whatever you decide, we understand. Crawford doesn't speak for all of us. Sarah smiled gently. I know that, dear. We took up a collection, Martha continued, producing a small cloth pouch that clinked with coins. It's not much, but if you need to leave ... Sarah shook her head, touched by the gesture, but unwilling to take their hard-earned money. Keep it for the children. They'll need it more than I will. As the night progressed, more visitors came, women, whose children Sarah had sung through croup and fever, elderly settlers who valued her calming presence, even young Lieutenant Harker, briefly slipping away from his duties to offer military insights on the route to the Apache territory. Each departure felt like a small farewell, pieces of her heart, breaking away and being redistributed among those she had served for 15 years. After midnight, when the last visitor had gone, Sarah stood alone in the center of her cabin. Her fingers moved deliberately over each surface, the table where she had kneaded bread, the shelves that held her few books, the quilt frame where she had taught younger women to stitch by feel rather than sight. She reached for her husband's pocket watch. In the silence of her darkened cabin, She wound it for the first time in 12 years. The soft ticking filled the room, not an ending, she realized, but a beginning. Time moving forward again, after being suspended in grief for so long. By the time dawn approached, Sarah Bedford had made her decision. The darkest hour before dawn shrouded the valley in profound silence. Sarah moved through her cabin with practiced efficiency, fingers selecting only what was essential: her songbook, a change of clothes, a small bundle of medicinal herbs, and a tiny carved wooden bird that James had whittled during their journey west. Each item she wrapped carefully in a shawl and tied into a modest bundle. The ticking of James's pocket watch accompanied her preparations. She had placed it in her apron pocket, its renewed rhythm a tangible reminder of her decision to move forward, rather than remain anchored to the past. A soft owl call 3 notes, too precise to be natural, signaled that her Apache escorts had arrived. Sarah paused, her hand resting on the cabin door key hanging from its nail. This small piece of metal represented everything she was leaving behind: security, familiarity, 15 years of memories infused into every board and beam. With deliberate movements, she removed the key and placed it on the table. Whoever claimed the cabin next would need it, though she doubted the locks would keep out those determined to enter. In the frontier, security was always more illusion than reality. The door creaked softly as she stepped onto her porch one last time. The pre-dawn air carried the scent of sage and pine, the earth still holding the previous day's warmth. Sarah inhaled deeply, committing these sensations to memory. "I'm ready," she called softly to the darkness. Movement in the shadows resolved into 2 figures approaching with the silent grace of lifelong hunters. Though she couldn't see them, Sarah sensed their cautious respect as they waited at the foot of her porch steps. "The chief waits at the sacred canyon," one warrior said, his English carefully practiced. Sarah nodded, then turned to touch the doorframe of her cabin one last time. Her fingers traced the notches James had carved to mark the changing seasons: 15 years of sunrises and sunsets, of summer heat and winter frost, of joys and sorrows absorbed into the very grain of the wood. "Goodbye, old friend," she whispered to the silent cabin. "Thank you for sheltering me." With that final farewell, Sarah descended the steps, leaving behind the only home she had known since coming west. The warriors moved to flank her, one slightly ahead, one behind, their presence protective without being constraining. "The path is rough," the lead warrior warned. "Many stones." "I've walked rougher paths in darkness," Sarah replied, extending her hand, "but I would welcome guidance." The warrior hesitated briefly, then placed her hand on his forearm. With that connection established, they began their journey away from the settlement. The route took them not along the established trails, but through hidden paths that skirted the edge of settler territory. Sarah focused on each step, trusting her guides while using her cane to probe the ground ahead. They moved in silence, broken only by occasional whispered warnings about the terrain. From a ridge overlooking the valley, Thomas Wells watched their progress through a spyglass. He had promised Sarah he wouldn't interfere, but neither could he sleep while she undertook this dangerous journey. The doctor's breath caught as the small party disappeared into a stand of junipers, then released when they emerged on the other side, continuing steadily toward the mountains. Near the halfway point of their journey, as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, one of the warriors suddenly stiffened. "Riders," he said tersely, "coming fast from the fort." Sarah's heart quickened. Crawford must have convinced Colonel Wilson to move before dawn. The warriors conferred briefly in Apache. Then the leader turned to Sarah. "We must leave the path. The way will be harder." "I'll manage," she assured him. They veered sharply westward, into rougher terrain where boulders and scrub brush created a natural maze. Sarah's progress slowed as she navigated the challenging landscape, her cane finding purchase between rocks. her free hand sometimes reaching for support against stone faces. The sound of distant hoofbeats grew, then diminished, as the cavalry patrol followed the main trail toward the settlement. Sarah and her escorts waited in the shelter of a rock, outcropping until the danger passed. "Go to your cabin," the warrior observed. Sarah nodded, a complex emotion washing over her, part sorrow for what she was leaving, part relief that she had chosen to depart. "They'll find only an empty house and a key on the table." The journey resumed with increased urgency. The dawn light, invisible to Sarah, but keenly monitored by her guides, represented both risk and deadline. They needed to reach the sacred canyon before full daylight exposed them on the open terrain between territories. As they climbed higher into the foothills, the air changed, becoming cooler and tinged with the scent of pine. Sarah's muscles protested the unaccustomed exertion, but she pressed forward without complaint, understanding that each step carried her further from danger and closer to a new beginning. "We are near," the lead warrior announced as they crested a ridge. "The sacred canyon lies just ahead." From behind them came the sudden, sharp crack of a rifle, shot distant but unmistakable. The warriors tensed, listening intently to determine its source and significance. "The settlement," one said finally. "Your cabin, perhaps." Sarah's expression remained calm despite the implications. Someone had discovered her absence and expressed their displeasure with gunfire. Whether it was Crawford, the military patrol, or simply a frustrated settler would remain unknown. "It no longer matters," she said with quiet finality. "That life is behind me now." They descended into a narrow ravine where the sound of running water greeted them. The path widened slightly, following the course of a small stream that spoke of life-sustaining presence in the arid landscape. The warrior's pace quickened with the security of familiar territory. Around a final bend in the canyon wall, Ałchíní waited with several tribal elders. Sarah sensed their presence before her guides announced it, a stillness that somehow conveyed watchful respect rather than threat. "Sarah Bedford," Ałchíní greeted her formally. "You have chosen to accept our offer?" "I have," she confirmed, standing straight despite her exhaustion. "If your people will have me, I would be honored to serve as keeper of the children's songs." Elder C spoke in Apache, his voice carrying the weight of official pronouncement. Ałchíní translated, "The elder says, what was separate now joins. What was silent now sings." The path forward is neither Apache nor settler, but something new that both can follow. As they prepared to continue the journey to the Apache village deeper within the protected canyon system, Sarah turned her face toward the rising sun she could not see, but could feel warming her skin. Behind her lay 15 years of one life. Ahead stretched the unknown terrain of another. The key to her cabin, left hanging by her door, glinted in the early light, an invitation to whoever might come next, a small symbol of continuity in a world of constant change. The journey deeper into Apache territory unfolded like a symphony of sensations for Sarah. Though her eyes registered nothing, her other senses absorbed every nuance of this new world. The canyon air carried unfamiliar, scents juniper more potent than in the valley, wild herbs she couldn't name, the mineral tang of exposed rock faces baking in the strengthening sun. "The path narrows here," Ałchíní warned, his hand steady beneath her elbow as they navigated a passage between towering stone walls. 3 more bends in the canyon, then we reached the village. The sound of water grew stronger, not just the small stream they had been following, but something larger. The acoustic quality of the space shifted subtly, suggesting they were entering a more open area. "A waterfall lies ahead," Sarah observed, her head tilted to better capture the sound. "Elder." C spoke briefly in Apache, his tone suggesting surprise. "He asks how you know this when you cannot see it." Ałchíní translated. Sarah smiled. "Water falling from height sounds different than water flowing over rocks." The echo tells me we're entering a larger space with high walls. This explanation was translated and met with appreciative murmurs from the Apache escorts. Their respect, already established by Ałchíní's endorsement, deepened with this demonstration of her adaptive senses. As they rounded the final bend, a chorus of new sounds washed over Sarah children's voices. Dogs barking, the rhythmic tapping of someone working with tools, the low conversations of a community beginning its day. The Apache village awakened all her senses at once. The scent of cooking fires, the feel of packed earth giving way to stone underfoot, the subtle change in air temperature as they moved from exposed canyon to sheltered dwelling spaces. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. The children's voices first hushed, then erupted in excited questions. Adult conversations paused, then resumed with the unmistakable cadence of speculation. Dogs approached, sniffing curiously at the stranger in their midst. "The people have been told of your coming," Ałchíní explained, "but seeing a settler, woman walking freely among us is still unusual." "I imagine so," Sarah acknowledged. "Change often appears threatening before it reveals its gifts." They continued toward what seemed to be the center of the village, where the sound of many feet gathering told Sarah that a significant welcome was forming. She straightened her posture, conscious of representing not just herself, but a precedent that might affect future relations between their peoples. Kiona's voice emerged from the crowd, warm with genuine welcome. "Sarah, Nasha has been watching for you since sunrise." The girl's excited greeting followed immediately, her small hand finding Sarah's with the innocent directness of childhood. "Singing lady, I saved you berries from breakfast." Sarah crouched to meet the child at her level, her hands gently framing Nasha's face. "How wonderful to hear your voice so strong, little owl. Have you been sleeping well?" "No dreams of shadows," Nasha confirmed proudly. "I sing your song when they try to." "Come." A ceremonial drumbeat interrupted their exchange, signaling the beginning of a formal welcome. Sarah felt something substantial and richly textured being draped across her shoulders, a blanket of significant weight and obvious importance. "The welcoming blanket," Kiona explained softly, adjusting it around Sarah's shoulders. "It has been in Ałchíní's family for 4 generations. Only the most honored guests receive it." The blanket's intricate weave told a story beneath Sarah's sensitive fingertips, complex patterns that spoke of history, tradition, and artistry beyond anything she had encountered in settler textiles. The weight of it carried more than physical presence. It represented acceptance into a world few outsiders had ever been permitted to enter. Elder C addressed the gathered tribe at length, his formal speech punctuated by affirming responses from the crowd. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the cadence suggested a historical pronouncement rather than mere introduction. When he finished, Ałchíní translated the essence. "He has told them that the Great Spirit sometimes places wisdom in unexpected vessels, that healing comes in forms we must be humble enough to recognize. He has named you Inan Bien, Mother of Songs, and declared that you will teach our children the melodies that bridge the visible and spirit worlds." A respectful silence followed this pronouncement, then gradually gave way to the normal sounds of village life resuming. The formality of the moment dissolved into practical matters as Kiona guided Sarah toward what be her new dwelling. "We prepared a lodge near ours," she explained, leading Sarah along a packed earth path. Nasha insisted on helping to arrange everything. The dwelling they entered felt immediately welcoming, a circular space with the distinctive scent of cedar and sage. The temperature was notably cooler than outside, suggesting thick walls that would maintain warmth in winter and coolness in summer. 6 steps forward to the sleeping mat, Kiona instructed. 4 steps left to the water jar. The cooking fire is in the center, but we keep it small during warm months. Sarah moved carefully through the space, her hands and feet mapping its dimensions. The practical considerations of adapting to a new environment temporarily overshadowed the enormity of the transition she had made. "How many lodges in the village?" she asked, beginning to construct a mental map of her new community. 43 families, Kiona replied, arranged in circles around the central council fire. The stream runs along the eastern edge. The sacred cave opens from the northern wall. As Kiona continued describing the village layout, Sarah absorbed the information methodically, translating visual descriptions into the tactile and auditory landmarks that would guide her independent movement. Nasha, who had followed them inside, suddenly tugged at Sarah's hand. "Come, the women want to meet you. Grandmother Lilu says you must learn our songs as we learn yours." "Nasha," Kiona gently admonished, "Mother of Songs must rest after her journey." "It's all right," Sarah assured her. "Learning the rhythms of daily life will help me find my place more quickly." She knelt to address Nasha directly. "Will you be my guide through the village, little owl? My eyes to help me learn my way?" The child's response was immediate and solemn. "I will be your eyes, and you will be our songs." Outside, the village continued its daily activities, the presence of a blind settler woman already being absorbed into the community's understanding of itself. Some, like Niall and his followers, kept a suspicious distance. Others, particularly the mothers and grandmothers, approached with cautious curiosity, drawn by the stories of Nasha's healing dot by midday. As Sarah sat with the women learning the patterns of their basket weaving through touch, the extraordinary nature of her transition began to settle into something approaching normalcy. Her fingers worked the unfamiliar materials, as her ears absorbed the cadence of Apache conversation around her, catching occasional words she recognized from James's limited vocabulary. "You learn quickly," observed an elderly woman, speaking in halting English. "Necessity is a thorough teacher," Sarah replied with a smile. "When one path closes, others must be found." The metaphor resonated with the Apache women, whose own lives had been shaped by adaptation to changing circumstances as settlers, pushed ever deeper into their ancestral territories. In Sarah's willingness to learn their ways, they recognized a rare bridge between worlds that had too often collided in violence. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, Sarah's new life was already taking root in the rich soil of mutual respect and shared purpose. 3 weeks into Sarah's life among the Apache, routines had begun to form like river stones shaped by constant water. Each morning she rose with the village, guided by Nasha to the central gathering where important announcements were made. Each afternoon she worked with the women, learning their crafts through touch and instruction. And each evening, as the sun set beyond the canyon walls, she sang sometimes settler lullabies, sometimes Apache melodies she was steadily learning, and increasingly new songs that blended both traditions. Today, Sarah sat with a circle of mothers and grandmothers. Near the edge of the village, a talking stick resting across her lap. This polished wooden rod, decorated with eagle feathers and turquoise beads, represented an unprecedented honor, the right to speak in council discussions. Never before had an outsider, much less a woman not born to the tribe, been granted such authority. "The fever that comes with spotted rash," Sarah explained, demonstrating a rocking motion with her arms, often responds to this rhythm and melody. She began singing a gentle tune that rose and fell like shallow breathing, a song she had refined through years of nursing settler children through measles outbreaks. The women listened intently. Then medicine woman Lilu repeated the melody, her aged voice carrying surprising strength. "Our people have a similar song," she noted, then demonstrated an Apache healing chant. Though the words differed completely, the underlying rhythm and tonal structure shared remarkable similarities. "Two paths to the same mountain," Sarah observed, earning murmurs of agreement. One young mother, cradling a newborn, hesitantly asked a question in Apache. Kiona, who had become Sarah's primary translator, explained. She asks if you will sing the star-crossing song for her baby. It's traditionally sung on the 7th day of life, which is today for her son. I would be honored, Sarah replied, but I would need to learn it first. What followed was a patient exchange as the women taught Sarah their traditional birth song, correcting her pronunciation of Apache words with good-natured persistence. By the 5th repetition, Sarah had captured both the melody and the proper inflections of the unfamiliar language dot as she sang it back to them. The talking stick in her lap seemed to grow warmer, as though acknowledging her effort to bridge there. Words with respect rather than appropriation dot later that afternoon. As Sarah taught 3 young Apache girls a settler spinning song that helped maintain rhythm while working wool, Nasha approached with barely contained excitement. Mother of Songs, she called, using Sarah's formal title despite their growing closeness. Father asks if you will join the council meeting. The traders bring news from the settlement. Sarah set aside her work immediately. In the 3 weeks since her departure, no direct word had come from Cottonwood Settlement. Though Ałchíní had sent scouts to observe from a distance, they reported only that military patrols had increased along the borders of Apache territory in the council lodge. The tribal elders sat in their traditional circle, with Ałchíní occupying the position of authority. Sarah was guided to a place of honor near him, the talking stick transferred to her hands. Our traders have returned from the northern settlements, Ałchíní explained once formal greetings were complete. They bring news of Cottonwood Valley that concerns all of us, but perhaps you most directly. Sarah nodded, her expression composed despite the anxiety that fluttered beneath her calm exterior. Please share what they have learned. An unfamiliar voice, one of the traders, she presumed, began speaking in Apache, the rhythm of his words, suggesting a formal report rather than casual information. When he finished, Ałchíní translated the essence. The military detachment found your cabin empty. Colonel Wilson ordered searches of the surrounding area, but found no trace of your passage. A note of satisfaction entered Ałchíní's voice at this last detail, a testament to the Apache warriors' skill at covering their trail. And the settlement? Thomas? Martha and her children? Sarah asked, her fingers tightening around the talking stick. The doctor continues his work, though he was questioned extensively about your disappearance. He maintains that you left of your own accord, seeking family in the east. Ałchíní paused, and added, the young lieutenant has been reassigned to Fort Brennan, away from the settlement. Sarah absorbed this news with a mixture of relief and concern. Harker was punished for assisting me. Perhaps, Ałchíní acknowledged. But our scouts report he wears new insignia promotion, despite his transfer. The trader spoke again, adding further details that caused a subtle shift in the council's atmosphere. Ałchíní seemed to consider carefully before translating this portion. The settlement leader Crawford has claimed your cabin and land, declaring it abandoned. This has caused division among your people. Many of the women, led by the one called Martha, opposed this action publicly. Sarah wasn't surprised by Crawford's opportunism, nor by Martha's courage. And how did this conflict resolve? It continues, Ałchíní replied. The women refused to recognize his claim, maintaining that you remain the rightful owner, whether present or not. One of the elders not see, but a younger man whose voice Sarah had learned to recognize as a higa, a moderate voice in council discussion, spoke at length in Apache. When he finished, Ałchíní explained, he suggests this division among the settlers presents both opportunity and danger for our people. A fractured settlement might be less threatening, but might also lash outward to restore unity through common enemy. Sarah considered this astute political assessment. What is your judgment, Chief Ałchíní? The question, asked while holding the talking stick, carried formal weight. The council fell silent, awaiting their chief's response. I believe paths are being created that did not exist before, he said finally. Your presence here has changed how some of our people view settlers. Perhaps your absence there changes how some settlers view us. Small shifts, like the first stones that precede an avalanche. The council discussed broader implications of the news for some time, with Sarah occasionally contributing insights about settler perspectives when invited to speak. Her talking stick granted her voice weight in these deliberations, though she used this privilege sparingly, conscious of her still limited understanding of Apache governance. As the council concluded, Kiona approached Sarah with Nasha at her side. They walked together toward the village center, where cooking fires were being lit for the evening meal. There is something I have wondered, Kiona said as they walked, but hesitated to ask. Please, ask freely, Sarah encouraged her. Questions build bridges between different understandings. Ałchíní told me how you lost your husband, Kiona said carefully, to raiders many years ago. Sarah nodded, her expression softening with old grief. 12 years now. Yet you never spoke of him with bitterness, Kiona observed. Never. Sought revenge, though some of the raiders were Apache. They were men making choices, not an entire people, Sarah replied. James himself taught me that. Before he died, he spoke of the Apache with respect, even admiration. Kiona was silent for several steps before continuing. Ałchíní lost his first wife Nasha's mother in childbirth. For many seasons, his grief was a closed lodge that none could enter. This revelation illuminated much about the chief's reserved nature, his profound devotion to his daughter, and perhaps even his receptiveness to Sarah's healing songs. Time doesn't heal all wounds, Sarah said gently, but it teaches us to carry them differently. As they reached the central fires, the familiar sounds of the village settling into evening rituals surrounded them, cooking utensils clattering, children being called to help with chores, elders gathering to share stories. 3 weeks had transformed these once foreign sounds into the comfortable acoustic landscape of home. That night, as Sarah sang the traditional Apache birth song for the new baby, her settler's voice carrying the ancient words across the canyon, she felt the first true integration of her old life, with the new not abandonment of one for the other, but a harmonious weaving together of separate melodies into something stronger than either alone could be. The summer heat had given way to autumn's cooler embrace as the canyon walls caught the season's shifting light. 2 full moons had passed since Sarah's arrival among the Apache, and with each day, her integration into tribal life deepened. Her fingers had learned new crafts, her ears had absorbed more of the language, and her voice had mastered dozens of traditional songs while teaching her own in exchange. This morning, Sarah sat near the sacred cave, where the canyon wall opened into a natural chamber used for important ceremonies and vision quests. Nasha sat beside her, the child small, fingers guiding Sarah's hands through the process of creating a medicine pouch. The stitches must be tiny, Nasha instructed with endearing seriousness, so the good spirits stay inside and the bad ones can't enter. Sarah smiled at the girl's earnestness. Like this? She asked, making a deliberately large stitch. No, Nasha giggled, correcting her technique. Smaller, like mouse steps. Their laughter echoed off the canyon walls, joining the ambient sounds of village life, women grinding corn, men preparing for a hunting expedition, children playing games of skill and imagination. For Sarah, these sounds had become as familiar as the subtler noises that had once formed the acoustic backdrop of her previous life. The sudden hush that fell over the nearby activities alerted Sarah to someone's approach even before Nasha whispered, "It's Ałchíní, the old medicine man." Sarah set aside her work and rose respectfully. Though Ałchíní had been present at many ceremonies since her arrival, he had maintained a formal distance, neither opposing nor embracing her presence among the tribe. As the keeper of spiritual traditions, his judgment carried unique weight. Mother of songs, he greeted her, his voice carrying the textured quality of extreme age. At 94, he was the oldest member of the tribe, a living repository of knowledge that stretched back to times before settler contact. "Honored medicine man," Sarah responded, using the formal address Keona had taught her. "Walk with me," he invited, an unexpected request that caused a ripple of surprise among those within earshot. Sarah reached for Nash's hand, but Ałchíní gently intervened. "Alone, what I must share is for your ears only at first." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah nodded. "Nasha, please tell your mother I've gone with Ałchíní. I'll return for the midday meal." The child reluctantly departed, and Ałchíní placed Sarah's hand on his forearm. Despite his advanced age, his arm felt strong and steady as he guided her along a path she hadn't yet explored. "We go to the Speaking Stones," he explained as they walked, "a place where the canyon walls create echoes that carry words back to the speaker, sometimes changed in ways that reveal hidden truths." The path climbed gradually, moving away from the village center. Sarah could feel the difference in the air as they ascended cooler, with currents that suggested a narrowing of the canyon. The sounds of the village faded behind them, replaced by the intimate whisper of wind through juniper branches and the occasional call of a hunting hawk. "You have changed our people," Ałchíní said abruptly, breaking a long silence. "Some say for better, some for worse. All agree the change is real." Sarah considered her response carefully. Change comes whether invited or not. The wise shape it rather than simply resist. The old man responded, a sound that might have been approval or merely acknowledgement. "Here we are." They had entered a space that felt different to Sarah's sensitive hearing, a natural amphitheater of some kind, where sounds returned from multiple directions with varied delays. The ground beneath her feet changed from packed earth to smooth stone. "Sit," Ałchíní directed, guiding her to a flat rock surface. "I have had a vision concerning you, Mother of Songs, one I must share before the full moon rises again." Sarah settled herself, hearing Ałchíní arrange various items near them, the soft clatter of bone against stone, the rustle of dried herbs being unwrapped. "3 nights ago, as I slept in the sacred cave, the spirit ancestors visited my dreams," he began, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality of formal storytelling. "They showed me a time soon approaching when blood might flow between our peoples once again." Sarah remained silent, sensing there was much more to come. "In this vision, I saw you standing between 2 advancing storms, one from the east bearing the thunder of cavalry hooves, one from the west carrying Apache arrows. Both storms sought to overwhelm the other, with you caught between." His voice dropped lower, "But you were not destroyed. Instead, you sang into the heart of both storms, and where your voice reached, weapons were lowered." The old medicine man pressed something into Sarah's palm, a small object that felt like carved bone, smooth from handling and strung on a leather cord. "This talisman has been in my keeping for 7 decades, Ałchíní explained. "It was given to me during my first vision quest by a spirit who said it would one day serve as a bridge between worlds. I believe that day approaches." Sarah's fingers explored the talisman, finding it carved in the shape of what felt like a bird with outstretched wings. "What does this vision mean, Ałchíní? What storm comes?" "The scout Tebe returned before dawn," the medicine man replied, his voice now practical rather than mystical. "The blue coat soldiers have established a new camp at the eastern canyon. Approach. Their leader is the one called Colonel Wilson." Sarah's heart quickened. "How many soldiers?" 20 mounted men. More than a routine patrol, fewer than a war party. They bring with them the settler called Crawford." The implications were clear. This was no coincidental military movement. They had come looking for her, or for retribution against the Apache they believed had taken her. "Does Ałchíní know?" she asked. "He meets with the Warriors' Council now." Niall argues for immediate action to drive the soldiers back. Others counsel patience. Ashki's hand covered hers, pressing the bone talisman more firmly into her palm. But my vision shows neither path leading to peace. What would you have me do? Sarah asked, closing her fingers around the talisman. When the full moon rises in 3 days' time, you will stand at the place where two worlds meet. Your voice must reach both. His aged hand tightened momentarily on hers. The spirits did not show me if you succeed, only that you must try. As they made their way back to the village, Sarah's mind filled with questions and implications. The bone talisman seemed to grow heavier against her skin, its symbolic weight far exceeding its physical presence. They found the village in controlled commotion, warriors preparing weapons, women gathering children closer to the central lodges. Ałchíní's voice carried from the council circle, giving measured directions that balanced preparation with restraint. When Sarah approached, a momentary hush fell over the gathering. In that silence, she felt the fragile nature of her position, neither fully Apache nor any longer fully settler, a bridge that might connect or collapse under pressure. The soldiers bring treaty papers, Ałchíní informed her without preamble. They claim to seek peaceful resolution. But they camp at our borders with weapons ready. And Crawford? Sarah asked. What does he seek? The settlers believe you. We're taken against your will, came the reply. He uses your disappearance to demand concessions. Apache withdrawal from hunting grounds near the settlement, restricted movement of our people. The political calculation became clear. Sarah's presence among the Apache, freely chosen though it was, had become a pretext for territorial demands. That had likely been Crawford's objective all along. I should go to them, she said. Explain the truth. Niall's voice cut through the murmurs of response. So you can lead them directly to our village? Perhaps that was your purpose from the beginning. The accusation hung in the air, giving voice to suspicions that had mostly remained unspoken during her 2 months among the tribe. The full moon rose over the canyon rim, its silver light illuminating the narrow passage that served as the primary entrance to the Apache village. Sarah stood beside Ałchíní at the council fire, the bone talisman hanging visible around her neck, her expression resolute despite the tension that hummed through the gathered tribe. They approach, announced Tebe, the scout who had been monitoring the soldiers' movements since dawn. 20 mounted men, Colonel Wilson leading. The settler Crawford rides beside him. Ałchíní nodded, his face composed into the impassive mask of leadership that hid the turmoil Sarah knew he felt. The past 3 days had been consumed by preparation and debate, some warriors arguing for preemptive strikes, others for complete withdrawal to winter grounds, and a growing middle faction supporting Ałchíní's measured approach of controlled engagement. Are all non-warriors secure in the high caves? Ałchíní asked medicine woman Lulu, who had overseen the evacuation of children, elderly, and those not prepared to fight. All except those who chose to remain, she confirmed, her gaze flickering. To Saradat, the decision had been hers to make. Despite Kyona's pleas and Nasha's tears, Sarah had remained firm in her conviction that she must be present when the two forces met. Ashki's vision had been specific. She would stand between advancing storms when the full moon rose. The children? Sarah asked quietly. Safe with my sister in the high cave, Kyona assured her, adjusting the ceremonial blanket around Sarah's shoulders, the same one she had received upon first arriving, now weighted with the added significance of her choice to stay despite danger. Ałchíní turned to the 20 warriors who remained in the village center, their faces painted for possible battle, weapons held with practiced ease. Remember the plan, he instructed. No first strikes, no provocation. But if they violate the entry passage, protect our people. The warriors dispersed to predetermined positions, melting into shadows with practiced silence. Niall, who had been named war leader, despite his opposition to Ałchíní's restraint, gave Sarah a final measuring look before disappearing into the darkness. "It is time," Ałchíní said to Sarah. "Are you certain of this path?" Sarah's hand found the bone talisman at her throat. As certain as Ałchíní was of his vision. Together, they walked toward the canyon entrance, a narrow passage where stone walls rose 50 feet on either side, creating a natural defensive position. Beyond this bottleneck lay a small clearing where the Apache sometimes met trading partners or official delegations, neutral ground that belonged fully to neither world. Positioned themselves at the inner edge of this passage, waiting as the sounds of approaching horsemen echoed through the canyon. Sarah focused on her breathing, calming her racing heart as she had taught countless frightened children to do over the years. "They come," Ałchíní murmured, his voice betraying no emotion. The moonlight cast harsh shadows as riders emerged. Into the clearing, their formation military precise despite the difficult terrain. At their center rode Colonel Wilson, distinguished by his formal uniform, and beside him Silas Crawford, his face set in grim determination even at this distance. "Halt!" called the colonel when the formation reached the center of the clearing. His voice carried the clipped authority of a man accustomed to immediate obedience. The soldiers reined in their mounts, creating a semicircular formation facing the canyon entrance. In the silver moonlight, their rifles gleamed with cold purpose. "Chief Ałchíní," Colonel Wilson called, "I come under authority of the United States government to resolve the matter of a missing American citizen and to establish new territorial boundaries as outlined in these documents." He held up a rolled parchment. Ałchíní stepped forward, his posture regal and measured. "Colonel Wilson, the Apache Nation welcomes peaceful discussion between equals. Your weapons suggest a different purpose." The colonel's jaw tightened visibly. "My men remain mounted and at ready as a precaution only. I assume your warriors watch us from the shadows with similar intent." It was Crawford who spotted Sarah, standing slightly behind Ałchíní. "There she is," he exclaimed, pointing dramatically. "Just as I told you, Colonel, they've taken her captive." Before Colonel Wilson could respond, a commotion at the rear of the military formation drew everyone's attention. A rider pushed forward, his civilian clothes marking him as separate from the soldiers. Even in the moonlight, Sarah recognized Thomas's voice. "Colonel Wilson, I must speak before any action is taken." "Dr. Wells," the colonel acknowledged with obvious irritation. "You were instructed to remain at the settlement." "I came to prevent bloodshed based on false assumptions," Thomas replied, maneuvering his horse alongside the colonel's. Sarah Bedford was not taken against her will. "She is clearly being held at the entrance to their stronghold," Crawford interrupted, "probably as a shield against our rifles." Sarah stepped forward then, moving to stand beside Ałchíní rather than behind him. "I am here by choice," she called, her voice clear in the night air. "I accepted the Apache's invitation to serve as keeper of children's songs, a position of honor, not captivity." A murmur ran through the soldiers' ranks. Colonel Wilson studied her with narrowed eyes. "Miss Bedford, if you're speaking under duress, I speak only truth," Sarah interrupted, her hand finding the bone talisman for courage. "The Apache did not take me from my cabin. I left freely when Crawford and others threatened me for the crime of singing healing songs to children, both settler and Apache." Crawford's face contorted with anger. "She's gone native, Colonel. Lost her mind after years of blindness. We need to extract her for her own good." "The lady seems quite coherent to me," Thomas observed dryly. "And as her physician, I can attest that her mental faculties have always been exemplary." The tension in the clearing thickened as Crawford urged his horse forward, closer to the canyon entrance. "I didn't ride 3 days to return empty-handed. That woman's presence here violates the settlement's security. If she won't return willingly, will the unmistakable sound of a bow being drawn cut through his words. From the shadows above, Niall and several warriors had revealed their positions, arrows nocked and aimed at the mounted men. "Hold!" Ałchíní commanded sharply in Apache, raising his hand to stay his warrior's attack. Colonel Wilson's hand moved to his sidearm. "Order your men to stand down, Chief, or I cannot guarantee restraint from mine." The moment balanced on a knife's edge soldiers, fingers tightening on triggers, Apache warriors drawing bowstrings further back, two leaders struggling to maintain control of forces, eager for conflict. In that suspended moment of potential violence, unexpected movement caught everyone's attention. From the canyon behind Ałchíní and Sarah emerged a small figure, darting past the adults with the speed only a child could muster. "Nasha!" Kiona cried in alarm from somewhere in the shadows. The girl raced directly to Sarah, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Don't let them take you, mother of songs," she pleaded, her young voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. The tableau froze, armed men on both sides, suddenly confronted with the reality of a child in their potential line of fire. Colonel Wilson's expression shifted subtly, professional detachment momentarily cracking to reveal genuine concern. It was this unguarded moment that Sarah seized. Taking Nasha's hand in one of hers and reaching for Ałchíní with the other, she stepped forward into the no-man's land between the two forces. And then, with the moonlight full upon her face, Sarah Bedford began to sing. The melody was neither purely Apache nor settler, but something new, elements of both traditions, woven together into a song that spoke of shared land, shared sky, shared future. Her voice rose clear and strong in the canyon, echoing from the stone walls that had witnessed centuries of both conflict and coexistence. As the unexpected music filled the clearing, Lieutenant Harker emerged from the military formation, dismounting. In a deliberate gesture of peace, with measured steps, he approached Colonel Wilson and unpinned his military insignia. "Sir," he said formally, loud enough for all to hear, "I respectfully request permission to serve as neutral witness to these proceedings." Before the colonel could respond, Harker walked forward and placed his insignia in Sarah's outstretched hand, a symbolic relinquishing of military authority in favor of the fragile harmony her voice was creating. Sarah's song filled the canyon, a melody that belonged to neither world, yet spoke to both. In the profound silence that followed her final note, something shifted, an almost palpable change in the atmosphere, as if the very air had been transformed by her voice. Colonel Wilson remained motionless, his military bearing at odds with the unexpected emotion that crossed his weathered face. Crawford appeared simply bewildered, his previous certainty undermined by the power of a blind woman's song and a child's embrace. It was Nasha who broke the stillness, her small hand still firmly clasped in Sarah's. "See," she called to the soldiers in her carefully practiced English. "She sings peace, not war. Her songs heal our tribe's children, just as they healed your children in the settlement." From behind Colonel Wilson came movement unexpected and startling. Martha Watson emerged from among the pack horses, followed by 3 other women from the settlement, each holding children by the hand or in their arms. "Colonel Wilson," Martha called, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "We followed when we learned of this expedition. These Apache didn't kidnap Miss Sarah. They offered her refuge when our own community threatened her." One of the other women stepped forward, Mrs. Henderson, whose twin boys had survived pneumonia under Sarah's care the previous winter. "My sons would be in their graves without her songs." When Crawford drove her out for helping Apache children, she did what any true Christian would do. She went where she was needed and welcomed. Colonel Wilson's gaze shifted between the settler women and Sarah, reassessment evident in his expression. "Mr. Crawford assured me that Miss Bedford was taken by force, against the will of the entire settlement." "Crawford speaks for Crawford," Thomas stated flatly, moving his horse to stand beside Martha. "Not for those whose children owe their lives to Sarah's care." Lieutenant Harker, still standing in the neutral ground between forces, addressed his superior officer directly. "Sir, I believe the territorial governor would prefer a peaceful resolution that acknowledges the complexity of this situation, rather than a military action based on misinformation." The subtle political reminder wasn't lost on Colonel Wilson. His military career depended on the governor's continued support, and a bloody engagement based on false pretenses would reflect poorly on his judgment. "The Apache have violated no treaties by accepting a willing settler among them," Harker continued diplomatically. "And Miss Bedford has broken no laws by choosing to live where she wishes." Crawford, seeing his narrative unraveling, made a desperate attempt to regain control. "This goes beyond one woman. These savages have been encroaching on settlement lands, threatening our livestock. My warriors have not crossed the boundaries established in the last council." Ałchíní interrupted, his dignity making Crawford's accusations seem petty by comparison. "If cattle have been lost, look to mountain lions or your own poor management." Colonel Wilson raised a hand, silencing further argument. "It seems I was brought here under false pretenses." He fixed Crawford with a hard stare before turning to address Ałchíní directly. "Chief, I propose a formal council tomorrow to clarify territorial boundaries and establish official recognition of Miss Bedford's status among your people." Before Ałchíní could respond, Sarah stepped forward, Lieutenant Harker's insignia still clutched in her palm, alongside Ashki's bone talisman. "Why? Wait for tomorrow?" she asked. "The full moon gives us light, and all necessary parties are present. Let us create something new tonight, while songs still echo in our hearts, rather than suspicions in our minds." A murmur of surprise ran through both groups. Colonel Wilson considered the suggestion, military pragmatism weighing the benefits of immediate resolution against protocol. An unorthodox suggestion, he acknowledged, but perhaps appropriate for an unorthodox situation. Within the hour, an unprecedented council convened in the neutral clearing. Torches were lit, illuminating a circle where Ałchíní and tribal elders sat facing Colonel Wilson, Lieutenant Harker, and Dr. Wells. The settlement women clustered. Nearby, Crawford relegated to the periphery, where his influence was minimized. Sarah sat at a position equidistant between the two groups, Nasha remaining steadfastly at her side. As discussions began, she listened intently, offering clarifications when cultural misunderstandings threatened progress. Near dawn, as the full moon set and first light touched the canyon rim, Colonel Wilson unrolled a fresh parchment upon which Lieutenant Harker had carefully transcribed the agreed-upon terms. The document, unprecedented in territorial history, established not only clear geographical boundaries, but also formal recognition of cultural exchange zones where Apache and settlers could meet peacefully for trade, medicine, and education. Most revolutionary was the section establishing the Canyon Village as a sanctioned place of intercultural healing and knowledge preservation, with Sarah Bedford officially recognized as its first settler representative, her name recorded in both English and Apache script. "I will need signatures from all parties," Colonel Wilson announced, military formality returning now that agreement had been reached. Ałchíní pressed his thumbprint beside his name, followed by the tribal elders. Colonel Wilson signed with an ornate flourish, then passed the quill to Thomas and Lieutenant Harker. When the document reached Sarah, Nasha guided her hand to the proper location. "Here, Mother of Songs." Sarah's signature practice to perfection, despite her blindness, joined the others, creating a bridge between worlds as tangible as the songs she had woven from both traditions. As the council dispersed, Martha approached Sarah with obvious hesitation. "Will you ever return to the settlement? The children miss your songs." Sarah smiled, her unseeing eyes directed toward the sunrise she could feel warming her face. "I believe the agreement allows for visits in both directions. Perhaps you could bring them here sometimes, and I might journey there when seasons change." The impromptu peace council had accomplished what decades of formal treaties had failed to achieve. Recognition that boundaries need not be barriers, that differences need not lead to division. 3 months later, as winter's first snow dusted the canyon rim, the settlement children gathered in the Apache village for an unprecedented celebration. Around a central fire, Sarah sat with Ałchíní beside her, their hands occasionally touching with the comfortable familiarity of those who had found unexpected companionship. Settler and Apache children sat intermixed, their young voices rising, together in songs taught by the blind woman who had bridged their worlds. Among them, Nasha moved with proud authority, helping younger children master difficult phrases from both languages. Dr. Wells, making his second official visit as the settlement's medical representative, observed the gathering with Martha beside him. "She's created something remarkable," he noted. "Something that might outlast all of us. She always saw more clearly than those with sight." Martha replied simply, from a distance. Lieutenant Harker, now captain, after his promotion for diplomatic excellence, watched with Colonel Wilson, who had returned to witness the results of their unconventional treaty. "Your career might have ended over this," the colonel observed. "Taking such a risk for one blind woman's freedom of choice." Harker smiled slightly. "Some choices define us, sir. I believe I made the right one." As twilight deepened, Sarah began a new song, one composed specifically for this gathering. The melody carried elements of both cultures, but transcended them, becoming something entirely new, yet somehow familiar to every ear that heard it. The canyon walls caught and amplified her voice, sending it skyward to where the first stars appeared constant, witnesses to humanity's capacity for both conflict and harmony, for destruction and creation, for division and ultimately for healing.